And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 129. Today we're going to be talking about fashion shooting in small spaces. For those of you who were watching last week, I was talking about doing the Dumfries Dumfries slow fashion movement, fashion show, fashion festival, Rock for Redress. And last week I was talking about trying to do catwalk type shots in very low light. Well, it wasn't just the low light situation I did. There was also a place where I got a chance to do a couple of other shots, but it was a tiny little space. So I'm going to show you some of the photos I did about that. So that's all coming up. Let me know you're here, leave me a comment, say hi, tell me what the weather's like where you are. So welcome, and so here we are live on YouTube, unless you happen to be watching the recording, in which case subscribe. Make sure you are subscribed somewhere down there and click the notification bell so you know for future ones. Leave a comment, let me know where you are in the world, say hello. I can see we've got a couple of comments in already. Old Pat says, hi everybody from a sunny Somerset. April here is saying, hi everyone from a rainy Long Island, New York. Jack is saying, Florida, says, hi everyone. Maggie says, hello all from a lovely soft autumn day here in Castle Douglas. And it really is actually, yeah, it's been a beautiful day today. And after what seems like an endless weeks of kind of cold, wet and miserable. That's Robert and Ann say, howdy all from Texas, where it's a bit chilly. Rosemary says, good morning from under the bright pink sunrise in Washington. And Meg says, sorry I'm a bit late, but I'm here now. You weren't that late, Meg. I'm still doing the introductions, so that's fine. Right. Okay, so yes, what I'm going to talk about today then is following on from last week's podcast on the fashion shoot. So last time was the sort of last week I was talking about that kind of rushing around, and essentially there's people. I can't do anything about light. I can't do anything about people. I'm doing my best to record an event as it's happening, and that's almost the kind of polar opposite of my comfort zone. Where my speciality tends to be is in structured, created narrative portraits, where I'm working directly with people, we interact, I can ask them to move this way or that, I can control the lighting and move it this way or that. I can change the settings on my camera to make sure that the quality is as high as it can be so that it's printable up to whatever size you want to have. That's really where I've honed and developed my skills over the years. But when you're shooting a live performance, you have no control over any of these things. You don't have any control over the lighting, you don't have any control over the people. If somebody's walking up the catwalk and they have a particularly nice pose to them, you can't suddenly leap, stop, hold it right there. Now let me just get my camera settings right. Oh yeah, just a little bit longer. Yeah, thank you. Because of course everybody else is also watching, and you as a photographer have to be pretty much invisible if you can. You don't want to be disturbing what anybody else's experience is of the performance. So it's a tricky one. However, when I sat down with Marie and Dan from Circle Vintage, the organisers behind the fashion shoot, or the fashion festival rather, we talked about the idea of trying to get some interesting sort of fashion type shots where I could kind of pose them a little bit more and have a bit of fun. Now, space was kind of limited, and off to one side of the Lawburn Hall there was a little room called the VIP, which was essentially the VIP lounge. So it was a wee bar, there were sponsors in there, and tucked in away, one little corner, there was a space not a lot bigger than what you're actually seeing here. It was about maybe 5 foot wide, about 3 or 4 feet deep, and that was it. But there was a kind of red velvet curtain behind with a little mirror and some kind of weird shiny wallpaper on one side. And so this little alcove really was there. So I thought what I want to try and do then is I'm going to essentially hijack that. I thought I'm going to use this place. Now, again, any of you who've sort of watched me for any length of time know that whenever I'm shooting people, one of the things I nearly always look for is to try and get a backlight. Absolutely no chance whatsoever of getting backlight in this, not without the light then showing up straight into the image, because the space was too small. So if the challenge I was talking about last week was low light, the challenge I was faced with for this set of photos was the limitation of space. So what to do with it? I realised then with only essentially, I could either have I still didn't really want to have the flash on top of the camera. I'd been using that for some of the catwalk shots. So what I decided to do was set it up in a very slightly off, there wasn't much room, but I could just sort of slightly up and to behind me, I got managed to put a kind of little silver umbrella with where I turned the flash to bounce the light back into the alcove. So I've got a one light source. But because I'm bouncing the light, it's not quite as hard as if the flash was going directly. Now, what I'll do then is I'll show you a couple of the images. So let me just, tell you what, let me do that. And I'll talk you through then. So if I click over here, hopefully then you ought to be able to see that. And this is a kind of almost direct on. So what we've got here, we've got Joseph and Eva. And for those of you who are particularly observant and have great memories, Joseph, you might remember from a couple of months ago when I was talking about the bath shoot. Joseph was the one who sort of dressed in a kind of 70s spaceman vibe, all in gold, lying in the bath. And Eva, on the right here, she was in the car shoot. So the car series of shoots where I was doing that kind of, well, it was also part fashion, but also part kind of road trip type feel movie. Eva was the other model for that. So wonderful couple of models. And what I really wanted to do was try and create shapes within the space. Now, this particular photo, this one is fairly straight on. And as you can see, you can get a sense of the fact that there's really not a lot of space here. I've got the light is bouncing from the top right corner, so you can see Joseph's face starting to move into shadow a little bit here. So slight kind of, not fully face on, slightly to one side light. But this kind of thing really is kind of too straight. What I wanted to do was I wanted to make the most of angles and lines and really kind of stretch it and go off kilter, really. So this was a slightly later shot. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you the first shot I did was I got hold of, you might remember Madam Joe and Chelsea, who I was photographing, who were the hosts of the show. And so I grabbed them just before they started. And what I did was I shoved on the wide angle lens, as wide as I could get it, on 10mm setting, because it's 10 to 22mm lens, this one. Put it on the 10 and went low. And what I really wanted to do was get that lovely distortion, the way that when you go with a really wide angle lens, that everything around the ends is sort of, I mean, they're both taller than me to begin with. Chelsea, though, has limbs that seem to go on forever, even if you're taking a photo of her straight on. But so what I'm really kind of exaggerating that and then getting them in really close together, limbs starting to entwine. So Madam Joe's got her arm around Chelsea. Chelsea's got her arm coming in around here. The legs are stretching out, arms are stretching out, and there's no sort of real horizontal or vertical line. The verticals are all kind of tilting out in the way, distorting in the way that the wide angle lens manages to do that for you. Likewise, the horizontals are also. So everything is sort of angles and lines coming in, which just sort of throws your sort of sense of normality out. And that's really what we wanted. There was nothing about this which was supposed to be normal, average. What I wanted was for people to be able to look at it and then just kind of linger a little bit longer and go, ooh, not quite sure what's going on here. So, and then to accentuate that, the idea was get in low and shoot up, or get up high and shoot down low. And so what I did then was I took another shot of them, and this table that you can see down the bottom, I'm standing on that table. Now I had to be careful because I started off standing over on the right hand side and suddenly realised that because of that I was blocking the light which was coming down over my right shoulder. So I had to move over to the left and get them to kind of look back up at me. And again, here you can see then limbs sort of curving back on each other, and it's all diagonals and angles and feeling really kind of a bit weird and strange. Which was wonderful, which is, and then the colours we've got in this alcove with that bright red, it's sort of all reds and golds, the red carpet, red velvet background, gold frame, gold swirls in the wallpaper, and with the kind of gold colours down here, managing to kind of nicely reflect. I kind of enhanced the fact that then Chelsea's wearing these gold trousers and a sort of slight blue sheen in the top, blue in Madame Jo's hair, blue in the socks. So this kind of red, gold, blue vibe and black, really, kind of really strong primary colours, just kind of whacking you in the eyes with it. So that kind of above or below kind of became a real thing. In the end, I ended up shooting more shots from below, I think, than I did from above. But that didn't really matter. So this one here, again, it's just sort of getting down low, looking up, allowing the sort of the distortion of the camera to sort of take over the shapes. So, I mean, this one here, where you're actually getting part of the ceiling in as well, is almost giving you that sort of sense that she's much bigger than the space actually itself. It looks like she's almost touching the ceiling. She wasn't actually. The ceiling was a little bit high, but because I'm low, you're getting that point whereby you can't really tell where the distance, what the distance is. Then I did this one here as well, where there was a band that was playing, and I think these three guys were a member of the band. This woman here, she was one of the models, but they just all happened to be free at the time and available, so I kind of grabbed them and shoved them all into the space. And again, getting close, lean over each other, bring your leg up, put one leg over the other, lean in, accentuate those diagonals, and it kind of really again gives that. And what I also, because it's wide angle, but I'm in really quite close here. I'm only a couple of feet away from them, so this sort of sense of almost claustrophobic, right kind of in your face kind of idea was a real part of the idea of it. Back to the ones with Eva and Joseph, and so with this one with Eva, this is one where again sort of shooting from below and getting that sense of distortion going up. But then I did another one standing on the table looking down, and you can see just how much the shape of the body massively changes depending on the angle you've got at the camera. From here, it's her head seems very small. It disappears up into the distance. From here, it's the opposite. She disappears down the way, and the legs become really short, and sort of so. Again, you're just kind of aware of that sort of everything not quite right. Proportions aren't right. Angles aren't quite right. But at the same time, it becomes quite mesmerising, I think. It kind of hooks you in. And then Eva was actually absolutely great. Every time I kind of, in the way a great model does, every time I went click, she would then sort of move her arms or her body slightly, and I go, and sometimes if I got something, I go, oh, hold that one a little bit longer. Otherwise, she would kind of move each time I went click, and that's great when you're working with somebody who's got a sense of how to shape their body. It certainly makes your life an awful lot easier. Then, okay, showed you that one. And then this one, I thought, okay, let's kind of get coming close. Jo's fantastic, can absolutely, again, throw this sort of sense of attitude straight down the lens. What's also quite good about this as well is because the light was pretty low, apart from when the flash went off, it means the pupils open really wide. So if you look at Jo's eyes here, the pupils are really large. And then the flash goes off, but there's not enough time for the pupils to adjust, so they stay being quite wide, and that kind of intensifies that sense of gaze and stare that's coming down the lens. And then a couple more here. This one, they just work so well together, these two. and I quite like the way the kind of nails are starting to kind of push into the skin a little bit as well. And then finally I said, well, okay, I said, put your head down, and you know, and there's something just really wonderful about this photo. I must admit, I've got a particular love for it. But although this one's a little bit more straight on, not mucking around, but whereas again, when you come back into this one, you know, all these angles become hugely exaggerated. So that sense then, to go back to what I was saying in the first place, which is really what you're going to do about one of the ways to work with a small space is to exaggerate your wide angle lens. The wide angle lens really, it makes the space look bigger to begin with, but the wide angle lens will also distort. So rather than worrying about that, you go with it and you ramp it up. You say, well, okay, how far can I push this? And by getting down low or by getting up high, by getting in close and allowing the distortions to really kind of push out at the sides, because then the wide angle lens pretty much makes everything into a diagonal, then what you do is you force even more diagonals by saying, well, okay, move your arm here, take this, put your leg here, intertwine there, and try and remove any sense of verticals and horizontals. So just that brief bit to mention again, which is verticals and horizontals tend to create stability in a photo and calm it down. Angles, diagonals create a sense of movement, of energy, and so ramp up the energy of a photo. The wide angle lens will always tend to do that. So hope you found that interesting. Thought you might just thought you might just find it a bit interesting seeing the kind of thought processes that went into creating those photos. Right, so let's see. Couple more comments. Oh, Nick Bass here says hello, and Maggie says I love all the angles and the high saturation adds to the sense of unreality. Thanks, Maggie. Cool. Right. Okay. So, wee reminder: if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, then do consider supporting them through buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Now, let's move on then to the critique section. So, this is your chance to send me your images. I've had 4 people send in images this week for critique. So, it's a part of the internet that I would encourage you to try and make the most of. There are very few places where you can really get genuine feedback on your photos. We stick our photos up on Facebook or Instagram, and our friends all click like because they're being supportive. But most people who look at our photos look at it for the content. So if you put up a picture of a kitten and they like kittens, they'll click like, regardless of whether it's in focus, well lit, nicely composed. It can be blurry, out of focus and half cut off, but it's a picture of a kitten, so you'll get a like. And that's fine, that's great if you just want the likes. But if you're actually looking to improve your photography, where are you going to get the proper feedback from it? And so that's what I created this little corner of the internet for, which is to help you do that. So if you want to send any images in for critique sections, then make sure you either, if you're part of Facebook, go to Facebook group Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres and post your image in there. Or if you don't do Facebook, then email it to me directly. My web address, kimayres.co.uk. So quite simply, just kim@kimayres.co.uk will get the image sent to me. If you're sending me an edited photo, send me the unedited version as well, because it always allows me to come up with perhaps a couple of extra ideas of ways that you might be able to improve the photo. But also tell me what your sticking point is. Tell me what you're having difficulties with. Right. Okay, well, let's make a start then. And so where are we? I'm going to start with Rosemary, I think. So Rosemary said, could you please offer advice on how to bring out the translucency of objects? I've been watching videos from digital animators and painters trying to figure out the answer for myself, but I haven't got as far as I'd liked. Interestingly enough, photography videos tend to focus almost exclusively on transparent objects, rather like glass or clear plastic, rather than translucent objects that scatter the light as the light comes through. Many fruits like that, or frosted glass or plastics. After struggling a lot in post-production to create greater translucence in archive photos, I realised that one of my issues is that the subjects were originally photographed in highly diffused lighting. Artificial light yesterday morning, I was better able to control the amount of diffusion. That helped me see how important it is to get the light correct before clicking the shutter. And she's pretty happy with the tomato experiment, but would accept any guidance. So let me show you a couple of photos then. So where are we? So Rosemary is basically, what she's saying is, so if you take, for example, this photo. So this is an edited photo, and we've got the wee creature here, some kind of cricket. And these kind of creatures are slightly translucent, and this is, I think this is the edited version, but it's really difficult to get a proper sense of it. You know, this leg is slightly lighter, but you're not overly getting a sense of just how much the light plays in. And part of this, again, is that notion of, and Rosemary's you've correctly identified the fact that part of the problem is the light in the beginning. Other shots she sent me were like these ones of the mushrooms. You may remember I was doing a bit on mushrooms the other few weeks ago, and shining a torch through the top to get a sort of slightly different sense of the light coming through. You're getting a bit of this again. I think this was the edited version. And here's one where she's playing with some sliced tomatoes, where you're getting a little sense of the translucency, the light coming through. But really, the main thing to think about when you're talking about translucency is the notion of light and where the light is coming from. So, no, not that one. Rosemary said, I should have shone a light through the mushrooms. Yes, you should. Because if we talk about the notion of translucent, so not transparent, but translucent, so light coming through affects that you can see the light is coming through, you just don't see the same amount of detail. Then the direction of the light is absolutely crucial. The direction of the light and the strength of the light. So let me show you something, right? Let's take a little torch here, and let's take a little bit of tissue paper, right? So, tissue paper. Now, if I hold it up slightly, you can kind of see, the shadow of my arm through it. You can tell that the light from behind that I've got up in the corner there is shining through. So it's translucent. It's enough. It's not a solid. It's enough to allow some of the light to come through. If I come down here though, how much light is getting through? Now, if I put the light on it, can you see anything from the other side of it? No, you can't. And in fact, actually, even if I hold it up to the light there, this torch light is in fact stopping any of that backlight from coming through. Okay, so when you're talking about translucent, you're talking about where the light is coming from, and the light behind it has to be stronger than the light in front of it. So if I now take this torch and move it around this side, now you can see the light of the torch behind it. And as I come in close, and as I move out, it becomes two things are happening. Well, one thing, the main thing is that when I've got the light here, it's diffusing. So the light beam itself isn't very big, but we put it through here and it sort of spreads across the material. Sorry, let's try it like that. So as it hits the back of the translucent paper, it spreads out and it creates it wider and it creates a softer. So this is exactly what happens with a softbox, or the little device I was showing you last week, where you're spreading the light of the flash, you're diffusing the light, so you're making it sort of softer and wider rather than narrow and intense. So sunlight is a very small light source, very directed, creates a very hard shadow. A cloudy day, the light is hitting the clouds and diffusing, so it's coming from all directions. And because it's coming from all directions, there's very little shadow, there's a lot less contrast. That light is diffused. So first of all, it's understanding that that light diffuses. It doesn't end up, as soon as it's passing through an object, if another object isn't transparent, then it is spreading and it's losing its power and intensity. And the second bit is to really understand that the light has to come from behind. The light has to be stronger behind the subject than in front of it. So let's show you a couple of photos then of things that are sort of slightly translucent. So if we take a picture of this leaf, an autumn leaf, and again, it's got, what I've got here is I've got the light is coming from behind. And so part of the leaf is lit up. Part of this is actually in shadow from either another leaf or a bit of branch or even the curl of itself. And again, you can see over here where the twig, the branch is blocking it, it's got in shadow where the light is kind of partially coming through. So there's a partial translucency to the autumn leaves. So when the light hits them, now if it hits from the other side, we get the reflected light. When we're looking at it from behind, what we're getting is the light that's passing through it. Or if we look at this one here, again, where we've got light kind of partially, we've got some bits where, like this one, the light is sort of, kind of hitting, I think it's probably almost hitting side on, but certainly here it's passing through. Let's show you something. Flowers are always good for this. So this tulip here, again, has got the light, the sun, the last of the setting sun just peeking over the top of the wall just before it disappeared. And we can see, we can tell here, we know that this is kind of an orangey red tulip. But where the light hits through it, it becomes brighter, quite yellow in this case. And we just got that kind of where you can tell them by that translucency that the light is coming through. But it's only where the light is coming through that we can really see that. Or, let's do this one here. So another tulip, this one was actually in the house near the window, and at this point you've got the window light in the background, and the window light is coming through, and it's a beautiful soft light, soft shadow, but that light is coming through and it's lighting up. So the purple of the tulip, where it's in shadow, is much darker, and where the light is coming through it is much lighter. We've got these beautiful soft gradations, and that's really translucency, and you can only really capture that translucency by having the light behind it. And if you think also then about that idea of when I talked about mist and fog, we're talking about exactly the same thing. Mist and fog also kind of, because of all the particles in the air, everything stops being completely transparent in the way that air usually is. The water particles then make essentially the air sort of pass it more translucent. It's thicker, it's denser. Now, if you know this yourself, if you're driving and the fog is there and you flip your headlights on, the light bounces straight back at you. But if the light is the other side of the fog, you can see the light coming from the cars cutting through it. It all spreads through and you get some really amazing light. So if you can be out in the mist and the fog, where you really want is when the light is starting to come through, to have the light the other side of and shoot into the light, because the light is coming through and it diffuses through the but that's the way you kind of get the sense of the transparency. It's not about reflecting the light onto it, it's about bouncing the light off it, it's about getting the light to come from the other side. Okay, so a bit like your little cricket or grasshopper. Here, for example, then we've got a little spider sitting in a web, and again, the light is coming in from behind it, and the thicker part of the body here, obviously the light isn't getting through, so it's darker, but this is where you realise that actually the thinner parts of the body, and especially these legs, are translucent, that the light is actually passing through it itself. And in fact, we even know that, I don't know how well that's going to show up, our skin is translucent. If I kind of do that, you can sort of see like a little red glow around sort of between my fingers. Where the skin is at its thinnest, the light starts to come through. Or sometimes you take a photo of somebody and with the light behind, and it suddenly looks like they've got bright red ears. I don't know whether I can kind of do this or not, but if I kind of put the light directly behind my ear, the light sort of almost shines. I'm not quite sure that I'm getting. Yeah, something like that. Okay, you'll notice that my ear is sort of showing up. So skin itself is fairly translucent as well. It's just that when we've got all the bones and the muscles and the meat in between, obviously we're not complete. But a little thin piece of skin, the light cuts through, but you only notice it if the light is coming from behind. Now, if you want to kind of accentuate that, because the other part of Rosemary's question here was essentially, what do you do in post-processing? Okay, sorry, just a couple of quick comments here. Rosemary says, no, Peter says, belated hello from Annan. I'm glad you could make it along, Peter. April says, this is that's beautiful with the purple tulip. And Rosemary says, I love your example with the leaves and the purple tulip. Excellent. Okay, so let me show you something else then. Because, yes, well, like I said, because part of what Rosemary was wondering was about how you might sort of do things in post-processing. So let me show you an example then where what I had was a couple of months back, I think I talked a bit about some photography I did for Nico's Mediterranean restaurant. And one of the things I was doing was shots of drinks. So here we've got, and I can't remember, is this a Blue Lagoon? Could be something like that. I can't remember exactly what it's called. But I've got a big softbox over on the left-hand side. And I might have had a reflector on the right, but I don't think actually... Yes, I think there's a reflector on the right, which you can kind of see a bit of the bounced light. No, it isn't actually. Actually, I think that, yeah, somewhere along there anyway. So there's bits of light kind of, but it's not really showing over here. But what we've got here, we notice we've got an orange here. And because the orange, but it's not really as bright as we wanted. And I thought it would be quite interesting to sort of turn the picture around. So I turned around, you can see the big softbox here. I came round a little bit, and now you can see the orange, and you can tell the translucency of it, and we're getting some of that beautiful texture that's coming through. Got a line here because that's the edge of the softbox. Went round from another angle, and here we end up with the light coming right through. Now this one is completely unedited, but if I then want to enhance that notion of the light coming through, what I might decide to do, there's always a couple of different ways of doing this. One thing, what I might do is, if I might get the levels. Now, if I take that up, you can see that that's starting to brighten everything up. Or from the middle, no, maybe not. Okay, so what I might do then is take the left side here, nudge this up a little bit. Now, everything else, and then mask it. So I'm just going to drop that in and then take the paintbrush and whatever, I mean, this is how it works in Photoshop, and then just paint the lighter part back in, something like that. And then that kind of enhances that notion of the light coming through. Another option, if I duplicate that layer, there's a dodge and burn tool, and I might go to the dodge tool. Now, I could go to the highlights. Let's just take that up to 30% for a moment. But if I kind of do that, it's just sort of, I'm actually losing detail. If I go to the midtones, I can just sort of bring it up a little bit and just kind of do little bits of touching up like that. Now, also the problem is with that, I'm kind of losing bits. So another option then is we maybe go to brightness and contrast. And what I do is I take the contrast, and that kind of makes the darks darker and the lights lighter. Maybe I'll bring up the brightness a little bit, but again, take the contrast a little bit more. And again, maybe I don't want that over the whole picture. So take that in and then just sort of paint it back in as I did before. And again, likewise, you might, if you wanted, you could pay, if you've got a texture slider or a clarity slider, you could probably play around with that as well if you want to actually make more of these sort of wonderful bits of texture that are within the orange. So that's ways you can kind of play around with. Now, Rosemary did send me a picture of a tomato, and she said, so I think, are we going to, yeah, this is the original photo. And then this is the edited photo, and what she's done is she's kind of highlighted bits and pieces. Now the problem is with the original is, so what you've done is you've put a torchlight or some kind of light there in order to get the backlight. You've started to understand that the translucency of the tomatoes is only happening when you're when you've got the light behind it. Part of the problem with where you've got the light coming from then is it's also hitting the table and creating this massive white spot, and your way around that then has been to let me open that, that's the one, is to crop it in and then darken that bit down. But actually really kind of what you wanted to do, Rosemary, I think is first of all is just get the tomatoes higher and have the light so that you don't see the light source or reflections from the light source, but the light source just kind of hit the tomato. Now whether you can kind of stand them up on a plate, you can put them on a little plinth, have a light source coming from underneath shooting up towards them, something like that, but it's worth playing around with. But then once you've got the images, once you've got the tomatoes, something like this. So if I'll just crop that in a little bit there so we're not getting quite as much of the brightness. And if I go to camera raw, and we'll just open this up a little bit, so I'll bring the shadows up so we can see a little bit more of that, bring that up, take the whites down so that and the highlights down a bit, so we're getting that. So we can see a bit more of the tomatoes, but again what you might do is you might kind of take the dodge and burn tool and highlight that up a little bit like that, or play around with your sliders, take the levels and but just selectively mask them back in, so you can just, and all you do is then lighten the bits where the light has come through, and then that way you're kind of enhancing where the light comes in. So hope that gives you a few ideas, Rosemary. The main takeaway from this, it really has to be the notion that if you're talking about the translucent bit, is you've got to get the light behind it. Now, you don't want to get the light in the shot. So unless you like, that one with the orange on the Blue Lagoon, the whole light is a softbox, so it just becomes a white background. But otherwise, you want to have the light sort of maybe slightly 45 degrees or something, just slightly out of shot, but also not so that it's reflecting on any surfaces that are also going to be distracting, but it's light behind the subject, that's what's going to show up your translucency. So, hope that makes sense. Right. What have we got? Oh, Pat says, love the orange and blue. Meg says, looks like we're on a holiday right now with a cocktail. Excellent. And Pat says, cheers, Meg. Peter says, good examples of using backlighting. And Rosemary says, thanks very much, Kim. Quite helpful. Your examples are most inspiring. Excellent. Glad to be of help. Cool. Right. So let's move on then. And next up, I'm going to look at Geoff. So Geoff joined the Facebook group, put in a couple of pictures. First of all, he's just sort of showing some of his photography. I said, are you wanting anything with critique? So he said, yes, he'd quite like some critique on a particular picture. And so this was the picture he sent in. And what we've got is a very kind of waterfall, autumn scene. I asked him, but what I was immediately aware of, while it might look kind of okay at an instant when it's fairly small, as soon as you actually fill the screen, it's very soft and to the point whereby it feels very blurry. Not just because of long exposure, but this kind of out of focus effect. So I thought, well, maybe something's slightly wrong here. Can you send me the original? So Geoff then sent me the original here, and at that point I realised, he's actually done a colour shift. Whilst it might have started to become slightly autumnal, we can see a little bit of browny yellow happening in the edge of the trees here. He's actually gone all out and recoloured that part to make it seem much more so. That's fine, that's okay. But in this original here, it also seems very blurry. But it's strange because it's not completely blurry. It's sort of, there's like a funny soft, it's a very unnatural soft haze. And I can only think that at this point what's happened is I don't know whether you've taken this on a phone or whether you've taken it on a camera and then pressed an effect or something, but it has that look of a quick effect where you press a button and it's called something like dreamy misty or something like that to kind of create this sort of slightly dreamy like atmosphere. But the problem is it's the one click things, it's become overkill. It's just too soft. It just feels unnatural. Whereas you can, if you're playing around with the editing, there is an effect that you can get, which is a more effective way. If you're wanting to get a sort of slight glow to it without necessarily blowing out the whole picture, there's ways of doing that in your editing. Now, depending on the editing software you've got, but if you've got Photoshop or you've got Affinity or you've got some similar kind of thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an example. Unfortunately, I can't do it with your photo because I don't have the original that hasn't already had the effect applied to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a picture of mine of a waterfall in woodland, which has got a little bit of sun coming through. Now again, actually the light becomes really important with this. So what we've got here, we've got waterfall, we've got shadow, we've got autumn leaves just starting, and this is a very kind of, there's a lot of detail. It's not, the water, it's sort of sharp that, you can go in and it's very textured. It's very textured. Now sometimes what you might want is less of the texture and sort of slightly more of that kind of hazy glow, but without necessarily making the whole thing out of focus. And there's a trick to this, and I've talked about this one before for those of you who might remember, where what you do is I've duplicated the layer and I'm going to then blur it. So I'm going to go to blur, Gaussian blur. Now, if I do something like that, that's obviously no good, way too blurred, can't see anything. Now, the problem is with your photo, Geoff, is that it kind of feels like it's almost been sort of blurred like that and then just left like that. So it's not really fully working. You're kind of thinking, well, but what you can do is go to the blur, and I'm just going to take that up just a little bit more and blur it like that. Let's zoom in a bit so you can see that it's out of focus. But then what you do is you change the interaction between this layer and the layer below it. And there's an option here. Now within Photoshop, I've got options here. I can darken, multiply, lighten screen, all sorts of different kind of ways of interacting to the point where weird stuff going on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for soft light. Now, what this has done is it's kind of increased the contrast, but it tends to make the highlights glow a bit. Now, it's made the darks maybe a bit too dark. So in between the layers, I'm just going to create a little curves layer and just bring that up a little bit, bring that down a little bit, just to kind of rebalance the light a bit. And then if I take those two, I'll just group them. And what you can see then is we've gone from that to that. And it's created a sort of softening. We've got this kind of softness with dappled light. If I wanted to, I could actually duplicate the group, I think, in fact. If I Control J, yep. If I Control J, now I've duplicated the group, the whole lot again. And at this point, we're now kind of moving into a place whereby it's just kind of, it's overkill. And it's almost overkill, kind of like, a bit like your photo, although there wasn't the sun in that. So it's one of those things where you kind of got to be really careful that in the editing process, sometimes you can go to there and you go, oh, that's quite interesting, let's do it again. That's interesting, let's do it again. And we do it again, and we do it again, and we do it again, until it's just a sort of funny mess which doesn't really make a lot of sense. So always kind of go back to your original as well, and then kind of go, well, actually, how far have we come from that? And maybe just one layer, one level of that is enough. And then, in fact, actually, if that level itself is kind of too strong, you can change the opacity of that, and we can just take that and we can nudge it up to a point whereby what we're trying to do is enhance we're wanting to enhance that feeling of the warmth of the sunshine and that sort of slightly magical glow of in the highlights, but we're not wanting to get to a point whereby we're noticing the edit. We don't want to be looking at this photo thinking that looks like a highly edited photo, because if we're looking at the edits, we're not enjoying the photo. And that's a really important part, I think, of editing, is that what you're trying to do is get, now, okay, I was playing around with angles and curves and making things look very unnatural in the shapes and the lines in those fashion shots with the people. But that's a different kind of thing. What that is about doing is about taking people on a little journey and a story into, oh, you're trying to trigger. People aren't thinking necessarily about the edits, they're thinking about a different world that you end up moving in. If the editing is wrong, people start thinking, they're too busy thinking. It's like when you watch a film. When you watch a film and or a TV program, somebody comes in, they slam the door and the whole set wobbles. You immediately realise you're watching a performance. It takes you out of the involvement in it, and it makes you aware that you're not watching something real. The enjoyment of watching a film or a TV series is just being involved in. Is not thinking about the fact that you're watching something, but that you're just actually watching it and experiencing it. And the problem with photography when you come to the editing is sometimes if we over-edit, overcook it, then what happens is we no longer are able to view the picture and feel and enjoy the experience of the picture. We're just sort of looking at it thinking, well, what's wrong with this? Or this doesn't feel comfortable, or what have they done with the editing? So basically, I think part of the problem with that photo, Geoff, is whatever editing option you've used has kind of become overkill with the photo. Either that or it wasn't in focus at the point that you took it. But if you're wanting to create that sort of very slightly kind of creamy, little bit slightly dreamier section without feeling like overkill, this system that I've just shown you might help. So hope that gives you some thoughts and ideas, Geoff, but thanks for sending your image in. What do we got? Rosemary, April says, welcome, Geoff. Rosemary says, Geoff, there's a beautiful photo to capture the spilling water and trees. I would love to see it again using Kim's suggestion for post-processing. Might require reshooting, but could be worth it. Yeah. Okay, right. So let's move on then. Next one I'm going to look at is Robert. So Robert sent in this photo here, and so this is the unedited version, and says, I took this photo last week and I'm not sure what to do with it. It will need to be cropped and finding the story will depend on that. As you can see, there are deserts in the foreground, windmills in the middle, and mountains with snow, and it's snowing, in the background. I would like to have all three subjects as well as a good story in the crop. So, I absolutely get this, Robert. This is you're standing there, you're in the desert. California, I think you told me you were at that point, and we've got desert in the foreground, we've got this wind farm in the midground, we've got mountains with snow on in the background, and in fact actually to the point whereby the clouds, we've got clouds sitting on top of the mountains, and perhaps the snow's just starting to fall on some of them. So you're there aware of layer upon layer upon layer of experience and view. And you pull out the camera and you go click, and somehow all these layers, or none of these layers, are really feeling like they're being caught. So what can we do with this, or where does the problem lie with this? Now, this is the unedited version. You did send me the raw version, but it's okay. I'm going to just flick around with the JPEG for the moment. Just because I'll just close that one from Geoff. So the first thing we know is we'll just straighten that horizon, and then we obviously don't need that amount of sky, so we'll just kind of pull in a bit, and let's just kind of pull in a little bit from the side there. Not totally sure where that horizon is. Anyway, okay, let's click there for the moment. Okay, take a little bit off that. So at least we're not worrying about the sky. So we've now got a panoramic. And in fact, I'll tell you what, let's just duplicate that layer. We'll quickly go into Camera Raw and just balance out the light and dark, because this one's sort of a little bit underexposed. So I click Auto, that's fine. That kind of gives us a sense of probably more what it looked like. We've now got the sort of sunnier day, we've got the clear sky, and we can now see what's going on. However, even though we've straightened the horizon and we've balanced the light levels, it's still a very, very flat photo. When standing there, you're very aware of all the layers of depth, but we're not actually getting any of the layers of depth within it. And part of it is really, it's the composition. It's not something I think we can particularly fix within this photo. Now, you talked about the idea of really what we're trying to do is then find the story. And at this point, I think we've really got to zoom in a very long way. If we zoom in this close, now we can start to really get a sense of all these wind turbines. And actually, there's something quite amazing about all these wind turbines when you start getting in close, and how all these lines kind of overlapping and crossing over each other. But we've had to get in very, very, and even here actually, now I'm up here, I can see that there are some up on top of the hill where the mountain is snowing, or where there's snow on the mountain, as well as down here. Down at the bottom though, the bush, these little kind of dry shrubs that are coming out of the sand, because we're kind of down level with them, we've actually lost any sense of the sand. And because these are so far away, there isn't the detail in it. So now all we've got is a kind of rough mush of sort of brown, greeny brown. There's a little bit of a kind of plant here just in the foreground, but there's very little really. So I think if you're closer in something like this, you're getting a little bit more of a sense of that. What's giving you the sense of depth is the changing size because of the perspective of the wind turbines. So we've got large wind turbines in the background, medium size in the, and then tiny little ones up on top of the mountain. And then as the further right we go over in the picture, because when we come back here, you see the mountains are much lower than the wind turbine. As we come around here, the mountain gets higher and higher. So when we get to sort of right over to the far end here, now we've got a sense of the mountain being above the wind turbine, so we've got that extra layer of height. So somewhere around here is probably almost your optimum point, where you've got foreground, maybe you've got a little bit of this little bit of tree here. We've got, sorry, come back out again. We've got you've got wind turbines, you've got smaller wind turbines, you've got really small wind turbines up on top of the hill, and then you've got actual mountain, you've got snow, and we've got cloud. So this then is our essentially our picture, our story within this. And maybe we could just take it over a little bit to the right, something like that. Now, when I zoom out, you can see that, okay, let's just undo. It's such a tiny part. It's not wanting to sort of sit there. In fact, actually, I'll tell you what, let me just all copy. Right, come back here, and then paste. And what we can see is that story is only that big. It's a tiny little bit, which we've taken from over here, and there's not enough detail left in that, so that we can see here that, I'm up to 200% here, 100%, this is how big it is on the screen. It's not enough of a photo. So in that sense, if that's the bit you're wanting, you just had to be way, way closer to it in order to get it. Because really, if you're wanting to try and get that sense of depth, you have to have very distinctive layers. The other option is you want to have something like a road or a river or a channel or something which is actually going into the picture. So your eye follows it into, and that gives a sense of depth. And what you're looking for is, the problem is that photos are two-dimensional and they flatten everything. The idea of depth in a photo is essentially an illusion. We're trying to trick the brain into thinking it's three-dimensional when in fact it's only two-dimensional. And so we have to try and engage all these different tricks in order to make sure that the brain does get tricked into having that three-dimensional sense. And the problem is as we look at the photo here, as it is, it's two-dimensional, and it's more kind of three-dimensional just here, where we've got a bush in the foreground, a bush in the midground, a bit of road, and a little bit here. So we've got a sort of slight, but by the time we get over to here, those wind turbines just blend into the hill and blend into the clouds behind. There is not enough distinction between one layer and the next. Now, perhaps if you had a drone, perhaps if you were up high or in a helicopter or on a very, very high step ladder, then what you might have had is looking down, you might have had the desert going and then the wind turbines getting smaller, and then as you hit the hill, then the hill rises. And that might have given you a sort of slightly different sense of depth. But essentially from here, from the angle you're standing at, it's not working. This essentially, to get the kind of shot you're talking about, you have to be in a different place. For that, you either have to be about 50 to 60 feet higher off the ground than where you are, possibly even 100 feet, or you need to have a road that's drawing your eye in, and or you need to be a lot closer until you can you're getting more of this, so that you're able to really get that distinguishing between the foreground and the background and get the layers. So I hope that helps. Sorry I can't actually fix this photo for you, Robert, but hopefully that gives you enough idea to understand why it isn't working and how you might change it if you find yourself back there. Or I dare say, knowing you, Robert, you would have taken thousands of photos and from lots of different angles, and you may well actually have something else which will give you a better in to it, in which case go and check out those photos and see where maybe you've got closer to the wind turbines, or you found something where there's like a road or a path or a channel into it, so that it's creating that illusion of depth to move into the photo. So hope that works, Robert. Hope that helps, gives you some useful bits of information. Okay, so what else have we got here? April says, that's cool, I would want to get closer, like up to the road. Robert says, unfortunately I did not have a zoom lens that day, just a wide angle. Yeah, we always tend to have that feeling that we've got the wrong lens on. No matter what lens we've got with our camera, we can always see opportunities for a different one. Rosemary says, I agree, April, Sunday feels like my travel day, since we get to enjoy images from all over the world. Robert says, each time I go to the Mojave Desert, I see spectacular views, but I rarely capture them properly. If I get closer, I lose the majesty. From a distance, I miss the details. This is the puzzle. Well, no, you're absolutely okay. Let's just talk about that for a moment, Robert, because I think the point is that I mean, there is that saying, I can't remember who said it, I think there's a few photographers who say that the best camera that you have, the best camera is the one that you have in your hand, right? And in a variation of that could be the best lens is the one you've got stuck on your camera. That what you have to do is to make a choice. Go with a wide, if you've got a wide angle lens, look out for the opportunities in whatever environment you're in, whether it's the desert, whether it's the forest, whether it's water, whether it doesn't matter what it is, look for the opportunities whereby your wide angle lens is going to work at its best. If you have a zoom lens, look for the opportunities where the zoom lens is going to work best. You will always, always, always see opportunities where you could have used a different lens. And unless you want to walk around with 10 different cameras with 10 different lenses on, so you don't have to try and change the lens in a desert, which isn't necessarily the best kind of thing to do, you're always going to be stuck in that problem. And camera accessory lens makers capitalize on this by the fact that you can buy, I mean, I know photographers who've got sort of 40 different lenses, and they'll go out and they'll take 40 lenses with them, and they'll still think of the lens that they didn't have, which would have been perfect. You may or may not remember, I can't remember how far back it was, but a good year or more ago, I talked about my trip to Morocco into the Sahara Desert. And I knew I was only going to be able to take one lens with me, and I put the wide angle lens on. And when I got into the desert, and that morning up there with the sunrise, I suddenly realised essentially I'd chosen the wrong lens. What I'd visualised in my head, what I thought I was going to be the perfect lens to get this, didn't work out. Once I realised that, I thought I can't go back now. I can't travel several thousand miles back to Scotland, change my camera lens. So what can I do? And I started moving about, and I got down low, and I got into the dunes, and I was playing around with silhouettes of camels up against the rising sun, using the lines of the dunes to draw your eye. And basically I created a set of photos that I would never, ever, ever have created had I put a better lens on my camera to begin with. So the skill with your photography isn't necessarily about always having the best lens for the environment. It's about getting the most out of the lens that you can with the environment that you're faced with. So if you're going to the desert and you've got one lens, if you've got a zoom lens on you, look for the opportunities where the zoom lenses are going to work. If you've got a wide angle lens on you, look for the opportunities where the wide angle lens is going to work. If you've got a macro lens on you, look for the opportunities where the macro lens is going to work. Maybe if you do different trips over different times, stick a different lens on each time you go, and you will. There's no doubt you will always see opportunities where you're going to. Every time I go out with a wide angle, I can instantly see opportunities where I wish I had the zoom, and vice versa. That's just life being out with the camera. But what you've got to do is, rather than curse the lens or curse yourself for having put the wrong lens on, you have to look for the opportunities that you can with that lens. So a little bit of a tangent there, but I think there's not just for you, Robert. I think that's for every single photographer, and that's also me saying it out loud to remind myself too. What else have we got? April says, if this picture was taken at the road and you were able to bend down and aim the photo, would get the majesty on details, for example. So I think a little bit depends on which way the road was pointing. If you've got the road pointing into the turbines, then I think getting down low and actually allowing that road to kind of come in could be quite a fun way of doing it. Robert says, thank you for the feedback. I agree that it's difficult to fix. By the way, I only took 12. Well, I'm impressed. Going back there today, so I may be able to get a better photo or 2,000. Okay, well, send me something. Show me something, because go back there, find something else. Show me what you get. Meg says, I really like the photo. Robert says, thanks, Meg. Pat says, thank you, Kim. I think Woody is planning an escape. Right, okay, so finally then I want to go on and talk about Viji. So Viji then sent in this photo and said, silhouette of my colleagues during a break at the office. Some are conversing, some are observing, some are lost in thoughts. It looked interesting and I captured. Overall, though, does it look a bit confusing and a bit tilted. However much I try to straighten it, it doesn't get straightened. And I don't want to cut down on the members there. So this is Viji's black and white edit, but she did send me the original, and Viji's original was this. And what's happened is the foyer that she's in, or that little bit of balcony, it sort of curves around a little bit, and as such it means this is what's making the problem for knowing how to get it straight. So let me show you what happens when you open it in Photoshop. Let's just close that one from Robert. And basically what happens is, if I try and straighten this with the bottom, with that little sort of bit that's going through their legs there, the ground, then it still feels very tilted on the top. If I try and straighten it with the top, now it feels tilted on the bottom. So what do you do with something like this? Actually, the thing to do is forget the horizon, forget the flatten, and look for the vertical. And actually, your verticals are these lines in the background here. So the thing to do is actually just tilt that until your verticals are feeling absolutely there. And then that, in turn, that's the bit that becomes your bit for anchoring. And then it doesn't really matter if the top part is curving around or the bottom part is curving around. You can see the barrier of the banister here and these little glass bits in the background, they're now vertical. They're what are anchoring the picture in place. And then everybody else in it happens to be vertical as well. Now, the next thing you wanted was you didn't want... The problem is we've done that and we've lost some of the people on the end. So we need to take that back out. Now, we've also got... This guy's foot is coming out. Again, for something like this, you really wanted a little bit more space to the side. It is that kind of give it room to breathe bit, I think, here, Viji. And so I think, so I'll use the content aware here just to give it a little sense. Now, it might not do, but I'm just going to take this out a little bit and just make sure you've got all these people close together, fairly close together. And the gap that you've got between these people here and these people here, you kind of want to have a similar gap on the outside. Either that, or you want to be cropping kind of halfway through a person so that it feels like it probably goes on forever. But if you're wanting to actually get everybody in, then really what you need to do is just make sure you've got a little bit more space either side. And it's one of those things where I tend to feel that, generally speaking, if you're unsure ever, shoot slightly wider than you feel you need to get the photo, because it gives you more cropping options afterwards. So now if I crop that, and the content aware will try and fill in something. And that's not bad. I think this side it's probably made it, on the left it's made it quite as it should be. On the right we've got a kind of faded little extra pair of legs coming in here, but we can just ignore that for the moment. I'm not overly worried. And then maybe we don't need quite as much on the top. Now if we come right down to here, this guy's arm seems to disappear a bit. So I don't think there's any problem with actually leaving a little bit of that ceiling there. It can come up a little bit, but I quite like the kind of reflections on the floor as well. So now if we crop that, I think that's probably where you would need to be with the composition. And yeah, I like this. I like this idea of the fact that you've got people in conversation over here. You've got arm gesturing up here. These two chatting. These two chatting. Looks like this last here is probably now. Well, I think kind of if I just grab the curves for a moment and pull that up, we can kind of see, and then zoom in. She's actually looking at us, but to do this we've got, it's the massive noise. There's not a lot of detail in here because most of these people were silhouetted, and that in turn informed your next choice, which was to turn it black and white and make it into a silhouette, which I think was a good idea. What I would say is but what you can do is you can kind of, just to give you a little sense, you can play around with that a little bit more. So if we go to hue saturation and we desaturate, so that's now made it into black and white. And then but what we can also do is we can play around with the brightness and contrast. You can, if you want to kind of create that, kind of makes everything a lot darker. But if we brighten it up and then contrast it, brighten it more, contrast it, brighten it completely, contrast it. So you can see that you can kind of get, depending on how much you want to do with the brightness or the contrast, you can do that. Another one is to play with the levels as well. So I've taken off the contrast, and again, if you boost the light, you grab from the right and you kind of come up, you can drag it up. We get to a point here where we can actually see everybody, although it's now so noisy that that kind of has a weird kind of interesting graphic design element to it in its own right, in that, although it's noisy because it's black and white, and it's, yeah, there's something in that. But then you could also grab the left hand side and just make it black as well, and then depending on how much you kind of decide to move these backwards and forwards, you can tell just how much you can create contrast and brightness as well. So just playing around with something like a level slider, I think sometimes can kind of give you a bit of fun as to where you decide those limits are going, how much of it's going to be just kind of an ordinary silhouette and how much of it's going to be moving into that kind of graphic design element. So a couple of ideas there, but primarily, Viji, I think that notion, the two key things for what you were talking about were, in order to get where's the horizon, if the horizon is if you've got different horizontal lines, some are kind of, and it's not the same on this side as it is on that side, Forget the horizon, go for the verticals. Where are the verticals? Anchor the verticals as completely upright, 90 degrees. And then everything else will kind of slot around it. And the other thing is about the composition, that if you've got a group of people, always shoot just that little bit wider than you think you need to, and then that way you can frame it and crop it how you want to in the end without getting it. But other than that, I actually really like that. I think it's a lovely shape, a lovely design, and nicely spotted. So, hope that gives you some thoughts and ideas, but thank you very much for sending that one in, Viji. April says, I like it, VG. Robert says, lovely silhouettes, great shot, VG. And Maggie says, really like this, VG. Meg says, fantastic job. And Peter says, nice photo. Right, okay, now, two things. Going to talk about now before we finish up. There's next week and there's the week after. But let me talk about the week after first, okay? So, in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to be doing a DIY equipment challenge. And what I mean by that is, for those of you who, basically, it's a suggestion from Rosemary, so you can thank Rosemary for this one. Last week, I was showing you the homemade flash adjuster, light adjuster I made out of an old business card box. And Rosemary sent a thing through to me. And yeah, and I think a couple of other people said that they quite like playing around, or they made their own little homemade adjusters, equipment modifiers, light modifiers, things like that. And so Rosemary sent me a message saying, why don't we do that as a kind of a challenge, or as a, as a kind of share ideas? And I thought that's a really, really lovely idea. But she said, rather than having 1 week, can we have 2 weeks to do this in? So the idea being here then, that what I want you to do is, I want you to, if you've got any homemade modifiers, whether you've made a flash adjuster out of a business card box, or a Starbucks cup, or you've used a bit of polystyrene as a reflector, or I don't know, whatever you've created, then show us. Take a photo of it. It can be a quick phone photo of the piece of equipment, and then show us a photo where you used it, and tell us what it was you've created and how it was used. And it doesn't. The whole point of this is, it doesn't have to be super fancy, amazing, expensive, or anything like that. What we're looking for here is the homemade solution. You were faced with some kind of problem, you were trying to get some particular kind of light, or you were trying to get some particular kind of photo, and you didn't have the really expensive piece of equipment. Even though you can go out and buy the really expensive piece of equipment, you either didn't want to pay for it, didn't feel it was necessary, you managed to knock up a homemade solution. Show us. Let's have, in 2 weeks' time, on the 27th of November, let's have a fun bit. During the next 2 weeks, send me the stuff. Put them into the Facebook group, or email them to me, a photo of the piece of equipment you've made, and a photo which you took using that piece of equipment, and tell us all about it. If you haven't tried this, get onto YouTube, type in photography, homemade, improvised equipment, modifiers, things like that, and you'll find hundreds of little videos. Or go to Google, type in the same little thing, and there's all sorts. Have a fun here, have a little bit of fun and experimentation of ways you can modify your light. And it can be something as simple as, we were using tissue paper earlier. This is a really good light modifier. You don't have to go out and buy a softbox. If you have a nice big sheet of tissue, in fact, actually, I've seen people use sheets. You could, if you're outdoors and it's a really bright sunny day, hang a white sheet, on a washing line, so the sun is on one side of it, and you get a really soft diffused light on the other side of it, which is ideal for doing portraits, or certain kind of still life as well. So you can use the power of the sunlight, but you're actually using a sheet as a diffuser. So anything like that. You can be endlessly inventive. Try something out and send it to us. So that's what we're going to be talking about in 2 weeks' time. So you've got up to 2 weeks. Try and get it in by the Friday the 25th, I think that is. 26th at the latest, but we'll then kind of share each other's images. But make sure you do, because if nobody sends me anything, it's going to be a very quick podcast. The other thing then is next week one or two of you who follow me on Facebook might have seen that I posted a quick little photo where a few days ago I did some emergency photography for potters, Fitch and McAndrew. And basically, on Friday, they launched their online autumn exhibition. So a pair of slipware potters, wonderful people. I've done photography before. I've talked about photo shoots I've done for them before. But when I did a photo shoot for them before, it was of as makers, people at work. But they had some extra pots that hadn't been photographed by their usual photographer, who was then off on holiday before just before the launch of that online exhibition. They needed some images. I got called in. And so what I'm going to do is take you through, show you some of the photos, but also show you some of the solutions and how I set up taking photos of their amazing jugs and pottery. So that's what we're going to be talking about next week. Right, okay, that's us. Thank you ever so much to everybody who sent in images. Thank you to all of you who've been chatting away, giving feedback. And look forward to your amazing inventions, or whatever, or even just whatever homemade solutions you come up with in a couple of weeks. But also, I will say next week though as well, there will be a slot for 3 or 4 critiques as well. So if you're wanting feedback on any image, there's no topic limitation on that. Send me your images, and I will do my best to give you feedback on that. So thank you very much. Take care. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Bye bye.